things you might find a need for in Excel, I wanted to show you quickly how pivot tables work. We've talked a little bit about representing data in a couple of ways by using actual numbers and letters and stuff like we see here in this example, and using charts and graphs to represent things visually in a different way. But you can also manipulate your data using pivot tables so that it quickly will sort and count or add different elements of your data. This might be good like if you're using an inventory system or something like that. I've taken some courses that we have at Odessa College, and so we have some just made up courses. Actually, these are actual courses, and then there's some made up numbers that go along with them. But just so you can kind of see that we have a kind of an extensive list of courses, and you wouldn't want to have to go through and look for everything. So we've got 1,581, or actually 1,580 courses listed here, and we have the number of students that are enrolled in the courses over here. So using this, what I can do is I can select my data, and I'm going to click on Insert and click Pivot Table. And Pivot Table is going to bring up this pivot table window, and you see that you can create a table. This is kind of like what we did with the charts. You can put it in a new worksheet or in an existing worksheet. The default here is that it's going to be a new worksheet, and it's going to be looking at this table or range. If you feel that that's not the right information that you want to be looking at with your pivot table, you can click on the little chart button here, and it will let you select the data that you want to include. But we just want to look at everything that's on here. So it's going to look at A through H, as you can see here. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to open up a new worksheet. And over here you see that we have pivot table fields. So you'll see all of the fields that are listed, and then there's various things that you can look at. So let's just look at the subject. So it puts subject in rows, and you'll see that it's broken down the subjects over here by course code. And now maybe we want to know how many are enrolled. So I'm going to put enrolled, and it breaks it down by, under accounting, there's these many students enrolled. But maybe we want to look at it in a different way. So I'm going to pull the enrolled over to values, and you'll see now that I have in accounting, there's 10 students enrolled. And so I pulled the count of enrolled over to under my values. And so now I have a list of my courses, or my subjects, and then this is actually the count of, it's not the count of the number. So if I look back at my table, you'll see that I have the subject here, and let's just go all the way back up to the top. So I've got the subject, and then I've got enrolled, and there's a number in enrolled. What this is actually returning is a count. So it's actually counting the number of instances of this accounting. It counts the fields that have enrolled. But what would probably make more sense, since this is actually a number, would be to change that to a sum value. And so we could, let's change the value to a sum. So do you see what I did there? I just clicked on my count here, and I'm changing my value field setting. And it opens up my value field setting box, and I'm going to look at the sum. And now what it's going to do is it's going to actually total all of the students that are enrolled in courses with the subject ACCT. And so you can see how that would be very useful in a situation where you have large amounts of data. So another thing that we could do, and again you can make changes to this, so we can take that off, and if we want to just do a count of the buildings, or you want to see where all of the accounting classes are offered in this building, SH or by the web, and you can see that AC&T courses are offered in these buildings. So you can kind of see different representations of your data without having to do a lot of sorting and manipulating manually. So I'm just going to click back on enrolled and take the building off and put this back over under values. And so again, it's doing a count here because that's what the default is. And I'm going to just click on my little button over here where my count of enrolled is and change my value field setting to sum, and then click OK. And then that totals the number of students. So that's a quick pivot table in a nutshell. But you can see how you can kind of pivot the way that you're looking at your data. So you're seeing it represented in different ways, and in a very quick way to do that. And now I'm going to click on another spreadsheet that I've started here. And so just imagine that this has 1,500 or 2,000 rows of information in it. And you've got a name, an address, and then the city that the individual lives in. Now, I just made all this stuff up, so none of this is actually right. So we've got, so the zip codes are not going to be right here. The addresses are just made up. But what happens if you want to sort this alphabetically by last name? If I click on it, if I select it all and then click on data to sort, and I'm going to select that my data has headers, and I'm going to sort by name, then it's going to sort by what's in the name field. So it sorts by the first name. When you're sorting by a name, you usually want to sort by a last name. So I'm going to move my data over a little bit. Let's just insert a couple of columns. I'm not going to move it. I've selected a column. I'm going to right click and insert, and maybe right click and insert another one. Let's just do another column just to be safe. What we're going to do is we're going to take this data and we're going to split it out so that each element is in its own column. There is on the data tab a button called Text to Column. And this actually splits your data, and you can tell Excel how you want the data to be split. So I'm going to go ahead and select my column here. So I've just clicked on the column header, and I'm going to click on Text to Column, and it opens up the Text to Column wizard. And it's telling us that right now there is something, it's called delimited. So characters such as commas or tabs will separate each field. So that's telling me that it's going to create a new field every time it sees a space. There's also something called fixed width. So if you have data that's represented without delimiters, but kind of in columns, but not actually in columns, kind of looking like columns, then you might be able to do a fixed width split. So we're going to go ahead and do delimited because we have a space between ours. And I'm going to click next. And then ours is actually using a space. So now it's showing us what it's going to look like. So right now I've got my name, and then it shows my first name and then my last name. But what happens here when you've got this last name that's three words long? So we can address that when we go through the cleanup process. So this split his name into 3 parts, and we probably don't have a whole lot of names that have multiple parts like that. So it's going to be a lot easier to clean up a handful of names rather than splitting out individually or manually a couple thousand names. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave this like it is and click next. And then you can see that there's a way that you can now set it up so that you can call it text, or you can change the value to a date, or whatever you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and click finish, and now my data is going to be split out like this. So this name here, I can see, and again, if you've got thousands of records, you might want to do a filter. So I'm going to filter, and then you can look through and select everything that's not a blank, and then it would collapse everything down so that you'd see all of the data that you need to combine. And so now we can add this data in there, and I'm going to open that back up, or just turn my filters off, and then I can delete those. I'm going to click and drag to highlight my columns, right click and delete, and that's going to collapse it down. So now I have a first name, so I'm going to change my header here to first name, last name, and now when I sort my data, I can select last name here and then add my level for first name. And so it sorts it appropriately. Now again, this can be done on any one of your fields, but you want to make sure that your columns aren't connected like this. So B and C, if we were to split if we were to split column B using text to column without moving column C and D over, then this information, when it splits out into these subsequent columns, it would override any information that's already there. So we can click and drag to insert columns, and then if we needed to split it out again, we would be able to use text to columns. So let me just undo what I just did because we don't need those extra columns. So let's say maybe you've got a huge mailing list that you're about to mail out, and you realize that you input your city, state, and zip all in one column. The post office usually requires, if you have a huge mail out, that you separate everything by zip code. So again, we could click our column header to select the column, and then using text to column, we can call it delimited. And depending on how you've got it broken out, we might select that we want to do a delimited based on comma, just a comma, no spaces here. And then that's going to separate our city from our state and zip. So now we've got a city in one column, and now we've got state and zip. And with ours, it would be easy enough to use that. But what if we have Texas and New Mexico and Oklahoma and several other states in here? Then we could now split that out again by clicking our column header to select the column, and then text to column, and then we're going to use delimited again, and next, and this is going to be a space. And so now it's going to split out the state and the zip code. Looks like I left a space in front of it, but that's okay, we'll fix that. So now we've got state and zip all in a separate column. And then I had a space here, I can just come back and delete this column. So I selected my column. You can right click and delete, or just however you prefer to delete. So that's how you can easily split out your data so that you can break it out into some usable chunks.